Hi, I'm Rob of TwinFinity, and I am here today to do a video that would probably closely resemble a masculine video like the rest in my series, except I'm kind of winging it without any real specific questions, just going off of other people's comments. And also, I have gone back into my rambles. My rambles is what I call my typed out on computer giant Word document that would essentially equivalent a diary. I started doing this almost 2 years ago now, and I've been chipping away at it ever since, and I've really been enjoying doing that. And once in a while I come up with a few gems that, having gone back and scanned through it, I've wrote myself some notes. There's one thing about doing anything where you kind of want to do it but you don't know how. Sometimes you've just got to step into it and just try it. There's been days where I've sat down in front of my computer saying, it's been a week since I've typed in my rambles, my diary, and I got nothing. But you get into it, you start typing something, a thought that's on your mind, and all of a sudden it leads to something else that goes into something else again, and all of a sudden a half hour's gone by and you've been typing away like crazy, and you realize that maybe you did have stuff, it just took a little while to dredge it out. So this video is very much along those same lines. I don't really know what I'm going to talk about. I've got about 20 notes. I got a couple of thoughts in my mind, but I'm just going to kind of start somewhere and let it go. I hope it's either a combination of maybe entertaining, although that isn't my primary forte, but it's probably going to be a little bit informative because it's going to bounce all over the place. Got to catch little thoughts from all corners of thought. Anyway, I've just got a first word here. The first word is socks. I'm going to tell a story about a time that I went hiking. Went hiking with a friend. I'd never gone hiking with him before. He was a friend from back at school time. And we were hiking along a creek. Now this creek had numerous waterfalls, and the creek bed was actually quite solid bedrock. The creek had worked its way through any dirt and gravel and whatnot and got right down to the hard mountainous rock. So we got to a point about an hour and a half in, and I took off my pack, I set it down beside the creek, and I stood out on the hard, rocky, bouldery section. There was a big flat section of rock, probably about 20, 30 square feet. And I walked right up to the water and I stood there. But what I didn't realize is that that rock was actually covered in a thin slime. And I slipped, I fell, I hit onto the rock, and the next thing I knew, I was in this creek. Now, this creek wasn't really that fast running. It would typically be 10 feet wide and only, maybe up to a foot deep. But I was standing about 6 feet above a small waterfall, about a 6-foot waterfall. And at that point, the creek was only about 2 feet wide and about 2 to 3 feet deep and rushing wildly. So over the waterfall I went, feet first, plunged into the bit below, and it was a very narrow, sharp canyon. And when I popped back up from the water, wherever I hit in below the waterfall, the water was actually coming over my head, and the rock was behind me, the rock was beside me. It was only about 3 feet wide, but I was behind the water, where the water was gushing over the edge of the lip. So I grabbed a couple of breaths of air and put my hands on each side and pushed my way through the waterfall, popped out the other side, swam over to the shore. My buddy was there already because he had ran around looking for me, but of course I wasn't there. It only felt like just a few seconds to me. He said I was gone for 45 seconds. I can actually believe that. Time was going probably a lot faster than I thought. But anyway, he was happy to see me. I crawled on my hands and knees and got back out of the water. I was wet, I was cold, I was, of course, completely soaked. I'd been underwater a couple of times and had just been swimming anyway. So Yeah, I went into my backpack, and my backpack was actually loaded light that day. I wasn't expecting any troubles. I had a windbreaker, not even a raincoat, because there was just about no chance of rain. And I had very little for other clothes. So what I needed to, I still wore, and what I could change out, I changed out my shirt for a light jacket, and that would be my only layer in my upper body. And continued on with the hike, and finished at the end of the day in not too bad a shape. The majority of me had dried out by then, but what hadn't worked was the thought that I didn't have a second pair of socks. So for every hike from that day forward where I was going anywhere near where there could be any water of any type or any risk of getting wet from rain or thunderstorms or whatever, I always carried a minimum of a spare pair of socks because everything else could be dealt with in different ways. That day I'd really got some bad blisters because of wet socks inside of wet boots. The spare pair of socks, hundreds of hikes later, I've only ever needed to use twice. But I always still carry them because it's comforting. And where socks comes in to any form of spiritual connection is that if you've been in a relationship with someone and there's been good moments, oftentimes when a breakup happens, there might be a slim chance of getting back together. So just like making sure that there's a bridge back, a person almost carries a spare pair of socks in their emotional realm of everything from excitement to memories. Some would even call it baggage from another point of view if there was some rough spots. But you carry along with you a spare pair of socks. And if that relationship, even if it only comes back to being a friendship at some time in the future, or maybe it becomes a full-scale relationship again sometime in the future, it's almost like you're pulling on a nice dry pair of socks that's still linked to your past, but because it's dry, it's a fresh start. It's less likely to hurt you. A lot of relationship thoughts, when you really do want to stay in touch with someone, you may remember the bad bits, but you hang on to it because of the good bits. You hang on to it because of the dry pair of socks you now carry in reserve in your mind to allow a relationship to reopen again. So don't be too stressed if you keep on carrying memories of a past relationship that could come back. You're just carrying your spare pair of socks. Love it, love it, love it. The next thing I see here is ghosting. The more I hear people talk about ghosting, and the more I've accidentally done it, or maybe deliberately done it in my life to other people, first of all, it kind of works out to be a little bit rude, so I've kind of stopped ghosting. If I'm going to ghost someone, I'm going to let them know and maybe try to terminate contact as opposed to just dissolving it with silence. I feel better when I do it that way. I feel like I invite less karma. But ghosting, for a lot of people, as I've come to understand it, is not done directly out of rudeness. It's not really a deliberate act. A lot of times ghosting is because of the person who is risking doing the ghosting has run into information that they are inconclusive of. It's information they don't know what to do. They don't know what to process it as. It's got no spot in their mind where they can sort and file it and get comfortable with it. It's left them just hung out there with no way of processing it. So in their inconclusiveness, they don't want to hurt who's given them the information, because most of the time the information was given in goodwill. In other words, it wasn't meant to be harmful. It just ended up being overloading. So they can't deal with it. They hope that another day or two or a night's sleep or maybe a week of no communication maybe will help them get to a point where they can understand and deal with it. But in the meanwhile, they have to be silent because they've got an obligation to respond, but they just don't know what to do. They don't want to be insulted. They don't want to be heard of. They don't even want to even risk misconceptions based upon what they've heard. So the safest thing that they can do because of their confusion is to just be silent. And if nothing solves that inconclusiveness, then the silence just continues and continues and continues. The person who's given the information says, I've given you a bunch of stuff. What do you think? And the person who's got it is not capable of thinking. Not at that level, not on those topics. So there is no answer, and the ghosting happens. It just seems to be that way. I can't really get around ghosting that way. Now, my next point, I'm going to blow up a bit. I'm going to get it wrong. It's to do with the metaverse. For those of you who haven't heard of the metaverse, and I'm sure that many of you haven't, it's to try and really simplify it, in fact, probably oversimplify it. It is literally a virtual reality. They've been able to map out the Earth and the solar system and stars and allow people to step into this artificial existence where they can kind of be whatever they want. And sometimes you create your own electronic avatar, your own existence of what you look like and what you're capable of doing. Other times, other people who are already in the metaverse have created these profiles where you can just inherit one or buy one. And that brings up an interesting point that the metaverse almost has its own currency because you can spend money in it, and people are in these artificial existences spending hours and hours a day living a completely virtual reality life, and they almost detach completely from what I would call the real world, the 3D world that we're in. A lot of times these people surface for a bit of food and a bit of water, and back in they go into this virtual reality life, and that's all the connection that they really have with, again, the real world. When I was describing this a little more in detail in my rambles, I came up with a line. And the line would go something like, in the metaverse, can your meta TF still ghost you? I'm sorry. That was meant to be funny. Another one. Oh, the twin flame connection. You know, I had a really interesting connective moment with Angie. In fact, it was a connective whole day. I got up in the morning, ate my breakfast the way things would normally be. I went to work, and about 45 minutes into getting into my work day, my day started to feel odd. It just felt stressed. I felt uneasy. I couldn't put my finger on it, but my day really started to struggle. It was like the day was conspiring to just be difficult. Things didn't go smoothly, and I was anxious about it. A lot of times when something doesn't go smooth, I go, well, okay, better luck next time when I try it. But today, or well, it wasn't today, sorry, but that day, it was really just getting to me because it wasn't making any sense. Things were going wrong for no reason. And my reaction to it was far more extreme than I would normally allow. Well, I got through that day. I got into my vehicle. I drove myself home. In fact, I even remember the drive home didn't feel right. I ended up in more of heavy traffic than what I would normally land up in. But by then I was kind of just writing off the day as just one of those days that just comes out of nowhere. Came home, came inside, said hi to Angie, and then she went into her day, and I started to realize that it wasn't really my day that was blowing up. Her day for her had been far, far more difficult, not necessarily disastrous in any one bit, but she was just wound up, stressed out, uptight, just everything that I was feeling and not understanding. It was just painfully obvious to me that her day had transmuted through and got into my day, and I was really, really just feeling her energies that day. It's fairly rare for me, being Mr. Matrix Twin, to have that strong of an influence come from anybody else. But if anybody does influence me, it's Angie. And that day was just absolutely remarkable. It was changing for me. I'd never felt it so strong. I'd almost felt like that I was Angie, because Angie used to feel me, my emotions and what was going on in my life. She used to feel it that strong and still does feel it that strong. That was a first time occurrence for me. And honestly, it just reinforced for me that as much as a person cannot be anywhere near a spiritual path or recognizing that any of this can happen, sometimes you got to just give them time, let them gain experience, let them gain confidence, let them grow. Now, of course, I'm talking 25 years almost of solid growth, but I've got there, and I didn't do anything to try to create it. It has just developed within me. So my little moral of the story there is, if I can get there, many other people can too, that you would not expect would ever have a hope. I've never been hopeless with myself, but I just never really believed that that kind of growth, that kind of ability to feel and experience would ever really happen to me to that level. I never believed it, and in spite of my lack of manifesting, I've got there. Have faith. If someone's on that journey, some pretty remarkable things can happen. Oh, what's another one? Oh, New Earth, Earth Ascension. Oh, I hate to jump in on this one. Let's say a bit over a year ago, in fact, even 2 years ago now, there was a lot of hope floating around for Earth Ascension for many people, part of New Earth, a creation of a lot more connectedness, not only between people, but between people and the earth and people and spirit. You only have to look at the world today, with COVID still having dragged a lot of people down into the dumps, and with worldwide conflicts being as high as they have been for generations. You wouldn't think that New Earth really had ever manifested itself at all. It really, really feels quite dark, actually, in comparison to the times where we were just on the edge of that hope, and then all these other things started to crawl in. But still, I actually believe that in some ways it has actually happened. Now, I don't want to go down the road of saying that with a bunch of positive things that have happened, we've got some negative things to offset them, because the net result would be zero. But there are many, many people, especially in the spiritual community, who really do feel like the earth has stepped it up a notch. Our communications as humans and our communications with earth have improved. There has been a lot of people whose hopes have at least somewhat manifested. The rest of what's gone on, I don't want to call negativity. I'd like to just call it contrast. Contrast is not negativity as per se. Contrast is a way of giving a person a chance to measure what is being contrasted against. So if we're stepping up a notch, but there's a bunch of darkness going on, that contrast gives us a little bit of opportunity to remind us that there was a starting point that was between the two, and that chances are real good, especially if that positivity, if the growth that has happened is still hanging on, that the negativity that is going on in our social world right now will be changing as time goes on. But what has been gained will not be lost. So therefore, the net effect is still a step forward. What's tough to understand is that the grid of connectedness may have only 20% of the population that are feeling better about their lives now than what they were 2 years ago. And 80% of them might be feeling less positive, a little more cautious, a little less understanding. And in some cases where there's human conflicts, maybe a lot more fearful, a lot more disillusioned. But those people who are in the very, very deep, dark depths of possibly fear are also trying their best to connect. If anybody in this world right now is trying their best to connect, it's the people who are living in fear. They would be trying to connect back with spirit, God, whatever they want to call it. They're hanging on to their only hopes and hoping that spirit, protector, is doing something to give them hope for the future. So even the people who have lost a great amount are still trying harder to connect. So therefore, as anything positive happens in their life, their level of gratefulness, even if it's nowhere near a recovery back to where they were, their level of gratefulness would be an incredible boost to the grid. And with all the people who have been taking things for granted for almost generations now, to have a boost of gratefulness come through from those people who are suffering almost the most, it's got to be having a ripple effect. I can't feel it, but I most certainly imagine it. I most certainly appreciate it. And I would like to really know if anybody else, in spite of what seems like to be a cloak of darkness, is also feeling that there is a very bright light above it that is still being a beacon for those of us who are trying to raise the vibrational energy of our earth, of our world, of our surroundings, and of our friends, family, and the world of people around us. I still feel that the net effect has been positive. It's just with all the mirroring and contrast, it's just been hard to see. I think even just a positive perspective might make it a little more visible. Wow. Energy bowls. I called it energy bowls when I was doing my writing in my ramble. I wish I would have called it funnels, because it's more or less how it works. It all stems back to a time when I was talking with Angie way back when we first got together, and I commented that my cup runneth over. I didn't have anything else as a reference point to describe that everything I was feeling was landing in my cup, and my cup was just not big enough to hold everything that I was feeling. At that time, it was a very, very positive, huge amount of positive energy that was landing in my cup. But now I've expanded the thought out to being energy bowls. What I was dealing with was Angie and I talking about a bunch of things that were just going on in our lives. We were replacing carpet. We were trying to get a new bedroom set. We were looking at doing a video, but we couldn't make up a decision which one to do. And then we wanted to take a vacation, and we were just so overloaded that we just could not process all the data around us. It was it was almost going back to that inconclusive I talked about earlier with ghosting. We were just about ghosting our own decision-making process because there was just so many decisions going on. And what I started to relate it back to was that our bowls of energy, our bowls of energy ourselves, were full already. And then when we needed to put more energy into our thought processes, there was just no room for it. Every time we'd reach in and take out a tablespoon of something that was filled in the bowl, another cup worth of information was trying to go back in. And unlike a cup runneth over, energy bowls don't run over. They just become full. Energy needs to go through what it is going through. It just can't go around once it's been attached. It goes through. So unfortunately, we end up with a backlog, and this is why I wish I would have called it funnels. You can pour more into the top of a funnel than will drain out the bottom. Sometimes you just have to stop pouring stuff in the top. But energy bowls don't necessarily flow out the bottom. Your energies mix up in them, and then as you deal with energy, you energetically scoop out that energy out of the bowl and then let it go through you and send it on its way. Energy bowls for a lot of people between the pandemic and now between some wars that are going on and some stresses that have just been inflicted on some people's lives because of financial bits or health bits, a lot of people's energy bowls are full. They're not processing energy either completely or properly. They're not able to take in their day, let their day flow through them, and then at the end of the night, allow themselves to open up a little bit more room in their energy bowl so that the next day has a place to land. With a lot of people's bowls being full all the time, it's almost tied up a bit of energy for the grid. There's been some stagnant energy. And now with what is going on in the world, we almost just can't wait anymore. Some people are starting to become sick because they just can't go on feeling tense, feeling upset for reasons that they don't understand, which would go back to their energy bowl being so full that they just don't have a chance to clear themselves out. We almost need to start as a collective to start to move some energy, give it a chance to unstagnate, and give some energy a chance to flow and intermingle with itself instead of being stuck in us as individuals. This is hard to ask for, and it's almost hard to understand, but for those people who have just been living in anxiety for months now, I would almost recommend that they try to not take in so much, to give themselves a chance to catch back up, to make some room for even just their hour-to-hour and day-to-day stuff. Have a place to land, give it a chance to flourish as energy instead of being bound and tight as energy. And then let that energy flow through and let it have a chance to go on and see if we can't get some energy pathways flowing better than what we have. Yeah, grid, that grid of bits, it's almost worthwhile going back to, but I don't think I'm going to. The last thing I think I'm going to talk about is something that I have done to myself that most of you won't be able to. It's something that a matrix person as opposed to a spiritual person could do. But as most spiritual people are mixing with other spiritual people and matrix people, maybe there's someone else who's stuck who could just use a little bit of help. I've got the words balance infliction on my piece of paper. About 4 months ago, I was recognizing that I was significantly out of balance in comparison to where I would normally be. I have 40 things in my week that I'd like to get done. And each week I was doing maybe 25 of them. And it was the same 25. It wasn't like I would do 25 of something one week and then take the other 15 of the 40 that I didn't get done from the week before and then do them and then start to cycle over again through those 40 things that tend to happen through my week. Now these 40 things, by the way, could be anything from constant chores, something as simple as do the dishes, to sitting down once or twice a week and typing out a ramble. To maybe playing an online game or two just to have something fun in my life. There's so many different things that many of us do in our week that we do on a fairly consistent basis that we just don't recognize. But I found that many of those things that I especially liked to do were just not getting done. I was either wasting time or I was just not setting aside time or doing too much of one thing so that there wasn't time enough for another. So I put all this onto I'll word it this way, a god-awful spreadsheet that ended up being, it started out about 200 points long. And I started to prioritize things from a point of view of, well, I want to do this twice a week. I want to do this 4 times a week. I want to do this, well, actually, I only want to do this other thing once a month, really. But it's going to take 2 hours. And I actually prioritized things and put a time value on it and started working on it like weekly, monthly, yearly things. I just put down everything that normally happens to me in my life onto this little checklist. And I put limits on how much I should really be doing of any one thing in a week. Now, I've left myself some flexibility. But for the most part, when I look at it, the things that I really need to do take up about 80% of my awake hours, if not 90% in most weeks. So then I started to realize why I was missing out on stuff. So when I would do something twice a week that I said I want to do twice a week, I stop there. I can go do something else that's on the list. And if it says to do it 3 times a week, and if I've done it twice in a week, maybe that's good enough. But I've now started to circulate through this list on a weekly basis. And literally, it's become my personal organizer. I can almost look at a day and go, oh my goodness, I really should. There's a guilt word. Should? Yeah. I'm going to wag my finger at myself. Yes, I've inflicted the should on me many, many times. But in this past 4 months since I started doing this list, I've got more done. I've done more rambles. I've been, I got to quit saying this, but I'm going to say it anyway because it's such a big part of my life. I've been working on collecting together Angie's and myself's memoirs, and we're putting it together into a giant list that some people would interpret as a potential book. Don't know if it'll ever get there, but it's been very much fun putting it together. I've started from the beginning of our lives, and I'm now just at a point where this collective memoir, almost autobiography of both Angie and I, we're just at the point where we're just a couple of months ahead of when we got together the second time and have started to live together, be married, etc. all sorts of comments. We're trying to base this on spirituality and how the journey went. But yes, I had stopped doing that for many, many months, and my list, hey, tells me I got 2 to 3 hours of that I need to do in a week. So I've been able to do that. I've been focusing on being balanced enough that I do some fun things. I do some memoir things. I do some ramble things. I still play a few games. I've got a few chores that I say I got to do 8 chores a week. That means that's like one a day plus 2 in one day somewhere along the way, usually on a weekend. And I'm more organized. I'm getting more done. It feels much better. And for people who are really frazzled and can't keep up, I can only imagine that I'm not alone in doing this. But it really is difficult from the point of view that sometimes just maintaining the list takes a couple hours a week. Just putting the check marks in the boxes saying, did this, did that, did this. Oh, I didn't do any of that this week, so I guess I have to do twice as many next week. You don't need to be anywhere near as complex as I am. I've made this list 350 items now long, and it's got everything from travel vacation places I'd like to go, right down to yearly chores like wash the outside of the garage door once a year. Do that in May. So when May comes along, I'll have this pop up on my checklist, and I'll be like, oh yeah, I did that to myself. Time to wash the garage door now that it's no longer winter and getting all dirty and dusty from snow. It'll just get dirty and dusty again from rain. So if I don't happen to do it, no big disaster. But it's still nice to have it look, no, it's still good to have it look nice, at least once a year. So anyway, that's just a little tip for those of you who are just running in circles all over the place and trying to feel better, but are not sure on how that's going to happen. So one more scan of my list: New Earth, TF Connection, Energy Bowls, Socks, Ghosting, Metaverse, Balance, Infliction. That's just what I talked about. One last thing: the COVID pandemic. Has it really been anything more or anything less than an opportunity for a few million, not many million, but a few million people to, quote unquote, go back to spirit or go home? A bunch of people have, probably through some form of soul contact or contract, have chosen this time period to step out of living in a 3D existence and go back to spirit. They came here, they did what they needed to do, and they have left. And what it's left for many other people is a chance to just do some inner work. There's been a lot of people who have been grieving and have had a chance to sit back and look at their meanings of life and have a chance to do reflection and feel maybe, well, through their grief, they're not feeling great about life in general, but it's given them an opportunity to realize that life does not last forever in just one simple incarnation as far as coming to Earth, living a life and going. Sure, no problem saying that you go on from beyond that, but to make the best of what you've got while you're here is also very important. We're here to learn, and many of us have been back many times because we haven't been able to learn it all in 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 tries. So there's been a lot of people who have been doing inner work and maybe working on baggage, whether the baggage has come from things that have happened to them this life, or maybe they've brought baggage with them from previous incarnations of some type. So really, the isolations, the lack of socializing has been a real wonderful chance for people to do their inner work. I'm not afraid to admit that I'm ready for some more outer work. I'd like to get back into a more normal routine. Most of us would, and in fact a lot of us have been able to. Where I live, we're now just stepping out of various forms of restrictions. And it's really nice to be able to go someplace and say, oh, I left my mask in my car. I don't really legally need it anymore. I can just go in and go do some grocery shopping and come back out, and it's okay. I have permission, and it's not really all that scary, and things are not really all that bad anymore in comparison to where they were. It's almost a chance now for us to just feel better about our opportunities. I certainly hope it lasts through the summer without any major hiccups. I rather suspect it will, because summertime is not when viruses like COVID flourish. I do expect that there's going to be a little bit of bump and grind and trouble come up this winter, but my positive side, my manifesting side, is really working on having it turn out that last winter was by far the worst. This winter may have its hiccups, but we'll just leave them as hiccups, nothing big. And I'm really looking forward to stepping forward in life. I hope the whole world doesn't blow up in the meantime. And let's see what the next couple of years of all this odd growth that a lot of us don't realize we've done, let's see where it's going to take us. Let's see what opportunities it brings. I think I'm pretty well done. This has just been a little encapsulation of what I've been thinking for about the past year. If you have any comments, please do. If you have any questions, I'll gladly take them too. I could use some extra questions right now. And questions on anything that I've just talked about, or if you've got any relationship questions that Angie and I haven't touched on in doing our question and answers, I'm always game to wing it myself. Anyway, have yourselves a good whatever day you happen to be watching this in, and we will, even though I can't prove it, because it's been 9 months since my last time I've done this, we will catch you later. Have fun, and welcome back to a little normalcy. Bye.